Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring you revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on ground zero and across the globe. Those are the chants of Ambazonians out and about in the streets of London on Friday. Their protest stopped at Westminster, with all of them squatting in the street and reminding Her Majesty's government of its act of betrayal to the sovereign people of Ambazonia, when the UK conspired in the late 1950s and early 1960s to deny our people their birthright to independence. The protests in London are hopefully part of a worldwide reawakening of the Ambazonian diaspora, which has been asleep at the wheel for far too long, while Ground Zero battles the colonizer without the backing it needs from international campaigns, such as the one that Ambazonia Calling is launching during this program for the firing of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The protests in London came at the end of a week, which began with the massacre of young men in Biya, as Innocent Chair reports in this first part of our news roundup.
Several shooting deaths of innocent and unarmed Ambazonian teenage boys were reported late Sunday and early Monday at the hands of the terrorist occupation army of La République du Cameroon, Biya alone counting 6 deaths Monday morning. A decomposing body was even located. More carnage was visited upon the population of Mbonge Thursday, where pictures show several charred bodies at the Mbonge District Hospital. Sources say the bodies are of hospitalized patients who could not escape the fire set by forces of La République du Cameroon. It is unknown whether any hospital staff sustained any injuries. In Balinyonga Tuesday, Biya forces of occupation were reportedly shooting and destroying properties, if not looting several around Itoma. Eyewitness accounts also highlighted physical molestation of men and women. In foreign news, the U.S. has terminated its training mission of Cameroon's Special Forces, reports Le du Sahel, a Cameroon tri-weekly. The withdrawal comes on the heels of very dishonorable and inhuman actions of the elite forces, otherwise known as bees, caught on camera executing a mother and her baby tied on her back, and then shooting dead another girl and her mother in the north of Cameroon. The same bees set fire on the palace in Le Biya and it was captured on video. 300 U.S. Army personnel were dispatched during President Obama's administration to train the Army of Cameroon to fight against Boko Haram elements overflowing from Nigeria into northern Cameroon. Finally, La République du Cameroon may end up not hosting the 2019 African Cup of Nations due to unpreparedness and the current unrest in Ambazonia. Construction of stadia are reportedly way behind schedule. Morocco may end up hosting the event. I am Innocent Chair, and we'll be back with more stories.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, compassfreepress.com, and africafreedomnetwork.com.
The French media in neighboring Republic of Cameroon has been reading the tea leaves of the war that the Biya regime is waging in Ambazonia and picking up on pundits like Dieudonné Somba, who this week ran an article proclaiming that the colonizer cannot defeat Ambazonia. The state is being put on its knees by exploding its budget, sapping troop morale, preventing income flows, and destabilizing the economy, he wrote. As Martin Ayaba warns, none should be tempted to jubilate prematurely.
We are not celebrating yet, but Ambalanders should be very proud of their efforts this far. We are smoking and bleeding the barbarians from La République gradually out of our lives and our land. Just read at the headlines in Francophone newspapers in La République du Cameroon and you will know that the enemy has been put in a chokehold. Cameroon Tribune headline, I quote, "The army cannot win separatists. The impact of the war is weighing on the nation. The eye of the Sahel," I quote, "The USA announces the withdrawal of its soldiers from Cameroon." Mutation, another popular Francophone newspaper, the Ambazonian army was humiliating the La République du Cameroon army, citing losses by Brasseries du Cameroon, gas filling stations like Total, Sirisi Banana of sustaining huge losses. That is not the end of the bad news for the colonial regime and its poorly trained occupational forces. If anybody still doubted that freedom is coming to Ambaland, then please brace up for impact, because freedom is coming to our land very soon.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Martin Ayaba, Ambazonia Calling.
Jailbird Paul Atanganji was in Bamenda in Ambazonia's northern zone on Thursday, with individuals described on propaganda-only CRTV as traditional rulers. Innocentia has more.
The Secretary General of the Northwest Funds Association, Fon Yakum TV, has stated their position, unanimously rejecting any calls for cessation and supporting Biya's call for a one and indivisible Cameroon. Nyam. He was interviewed at the conclusion of a secretive meeting between Cameroon's Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanganji, and the funds in Bamenda. Fon Angwaf of Mancon was present at the meeting. The infamous Mayor Biya, Patrick Ekema, has been accused of masterminding the abduction of several Fako chiefs, leading to the death last week of Chief Mbanda of Lisoke Moliwe. Accusers point to the fact that Ekema had the wherewithal and allegedly knew about a meeting of the chiefs prior to the abduction. Besides, accusers say he had no leverage to demand their release unless he knew their whereabouts all along. The National Telegraph in Cameroon is reporting that the French President Emmanuel Macron has been recruiting voters from Chad, Niger, and the Central African Republic and dispatching them to Ambazonia so as to ensure that voting takes place in the occupied territory. All frontline movements for independence of Ambazonia are calling for a zero vote in Ambazonia. Speculation is rife as to why the French president has scheduled a meeting with Biya in November, a month after elections in October. La République du Cameroon's war of occupation is costing her tremendously and has started hurting the pockets of its ordinary citizens. In a tweet by freelance journalist Eli Smith, he reports scarcity and the skyrocketing prices of plantains and other food commodities because of transportation difficulties out of Ambazonia. At the macro level, cocoa production dropped 10% in May over same time last year. In the energy sector, Barry Morgan of Upstream Online points to declining or lukewarm interest at best for Cameroon's onshore and offshore licensing offerings. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees has, Thursday, expressed shock over the death of Nigerian asylum seekers who died when an army truck drove over an improvised explosive device that exploded in Homaka in that country's Mayu Sava division. This tragic incident is a disappointing testament of the continuing forced returns refoulement of refugees and asylum seekers from Cameroon, said Valentin Tapsoda, director of the Commission's Regional Bureau for Africa. For Ambazonians, it readily explains why a Nigeria extradited Sisiko Ayoktabe and other compatriots arrested over 8 months ago in Nigeria. Finally, Ambazonian restoration fighters are especially cautioned to be extra careful about carrying anything seized from the occupation forces of La République du Cameroon. There is credible evidence that chips are inserted or planted in uniforms and other military gear to track down whoever is in possession. Innocentia, Ambazonia Calling.
Still ahead in this edition, we have The Devil Unmasked with Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. We have a winner of the Nyamfuka of the Week. And we are not done until you have heard our letter to Joshua. So stay tuned, kick back, relax, and enjoy Ambazonia Calling. The Secretary General of the United Nations is allegedly abusing his office by offering pay-to-play deals, by offering to run public relations campaigns on behalf of, as well as to help cover up for war crimes and genocidal violence perpetrated by the Biya regime in Ambazonia. This is according to a report written amongst others by Dr. Diongute Joseph and Dr. Gogomo Paul, and submitted to the colonial president of the Republic of Cameroon, Paul Biya Bimvondo, following a mission to the United States. Here is John Ba-Akuru with the first part of the scandal created by the Secretary General of the United Nations by telling falsehoods against the people of Ambazonia.
This is a huge shame, and that is not all. Mr. Guterres proposes that he is personally going to use his high offices as Secretary General of the United Nations to lead a public relations campaign to exonerate a genocidal and baby-killing regime. And those are things that the Secretary General of the United Nations is going to be doing. He is going to lead a public relations campaign to clean one of the worst dictators of our times. That is now the new definition of the job of the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Calls are growing louder for every Ambazonian who truly wants freedom from colonial rule by La République and independence for Ambazonia to stay away from the death trap called AAC3, convened by Christian Cardinal Tumi and Dr. Simon Munzu. If the duo and the moderator and imams who support them, along with Kawala and Chief Justice Aya Paul Abine, who supported them this week, if they truly are holding the meeting in the spirit of AAC1 and AAC2, or are claiming to be doing so pursuant to the spirit of those two conferences, they ought to be reminded by the wording of the following resolution adopted by the first two conferences.
The Anglophone people of Cameroon meeting at Bamenda in the second All-Anglophone Conference, AAC2, solemnly adopt and issue the following proclamation. Should the government either persist in its refusal to engage in meaningful constitutional talks or fail to engage in such talks within a reasonable time, the Anglophone Council shall inform the Anglophone people by all suitable means it shall thereupon proclaim the revival of the independence and sovereignty of the Anglophone territory of the Southern Cameroons and take all measures necessary to secure, defend, and preserve the independence, sovereignty, and integrity of the said territory. Following the proclamation of the revival of the independence and sovereignty of Southern Cameroons as provided for here above, the Anglophone Council shall, without having to convene another session of the Anglophone Conference, transform itself into the Southern Cameroon Constituent Assembly for the purpose of drafting, debating, and adopting a constitution for the independent and sovereign state of Southern Cameroons.
Now say that again.
The Anglophone Council shall, without having to convene another session of the Anglophone Conference.
There you got it. We found a video clip of a Nigerian bishop who is addressing the issues of Biafra, where there continues to be some level of agitation for self-rule by way of secession from Nigeria. Although in the case of Biafra, they would be truly seceding, unlike Ambazonia, which has restored its independence won before the United Nations, the bishop's message is one that Christian Cardinal Tumi should listen to particularly. Merely replace Nigeria with the word the Cameroons, and the message is crystal clear.
We cannot run away from the reality that Nigeria has to be restructured. Whether it is the restructuring that gives more powers to states or a return to the regional arrangement of the past, or the restructuring that allows parts of the country that want to go and stand as independent nation, whatever that restructuring means, we must not run away from it. And our position as bishop, and I must say now, I'm carrying you along as a diocese, is that if we continue to pretend that all is well, we will keep bleeding profusely, and very soon there might be nothing called Nigeria. Instead of our killing ourselves under the pretext of remaining one indivisible nation, some people say Nigeria's unity is non-negotiable. I want to see how it is negotiable. This thing is like marriage. You don't force two people to get married. We have been forced into a marriage that is hurting us. And every day we are dying and pretending to be one. Please, instead of our killing ourselves, and there will be no Nigeria left, let us come to a round table like this. Bring Nigeria as a cake. Bring one big knife and share the cake. Share the cake. Share the cake.
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news strife. Call us the Kalakuta Republic of commentary, opinion, and editorials. Ambazonians must guard against war propaganda designed to sap their morale. This week, pictures surface of the mortal remains of so-called ADF fighters, raising questions about how to tackle competing priorities with limited resources, but betraying how desperate the colonizers have become at killing young men and framing them to be seen as wearing Odeshi charms, sporting ADF uniforms, which no ADF forces ever do, or holding onto weapons in a posture in death that betrays poor setup. Martin Ayaba has investigated the postings and advises on what we have read, heard, and seen online this week.
These opinions marry very well with the intended outcomes by those who planted the mischievous pictures. This reporter took the task to check with the leadership of the ADF about the veracity of these footages, and it was revealed that General Ivo, the top ADF commander on Ground Zero, was unaware of any incidents with any of his units. He is said to have concluded that it is a mounted propaganda campaign by the enemy come to demoralize the Ambazonian people and fighters and demonstrate that the enemy is still very dangerous and is winning. Yet, as people were becoming more curious about the authenticity of the footages, a brave Ambalander pulled the same pictures that were planted on a Facebook posting by a certain Manju Francis last July 25th. And I am quoting extensively to give a perspective of what the post was intended to achieve. Quote, "Today, one more left on the floor. We have no means to achieve our goal, and goal here is gold jewelry. People we have sent to the forest to show La République du Cameroon that we control the area are dying of starvation." End of quote. After ranting, the author concluded in quote, "My people, let's understand that we are definitely losing this war. Things are falling apart. You talk about warfare propaganda 101, then this seems to be coming from the enemy war chest, deep in the inner cabinet of Atanganji and other spin doctors of the very desperate occupational regime. They have worked very hard to infiltrate our various chat groups and are using their war tactics to dampen the Ambazonians and their brave fighters on ground zero. They use these tactics to shock the collective imagination of our people and to create pools of supporters within the ranks of our people. What happened in Menka, Pini, where over 30 unarmed youths were massacred and their bodies led to show as a dissuasive tactic, was part of this same playbook. These tactics by the occupational forces was used successfully against the Bamileke during the UPC fight for independence. UPC fighters were often murdered and beheaded, and their heads were hung by the roadside by this same criminal colonial regime to break the psyche of the fighters and the population at large. Ambazonians must be vigilant and be very curious about the fact that the brutal regime is not going to sleep until they find a solution to this lost war that they declared on our people. All our chat groups have been infiltrated and compromised. Yet that should never dampen our resolve to smoke them out of our country. Martin Ayaba, Ambazonia Calling.
How do we reach Biya fastest? How do we kick out the occupying troops most efficiently? How will Ambazonians become a recognized country on its own with a well-working government of its own? We asked Ambazonia's ambassador-in-waiting to Germany, Christoph Messner. Here are some of his answers.
The first step to reach all this is the realization of every Ambazonian at home and abroad that now is the hour of mass mobilization, of everybody's sacrifice for the liberation, of standing up collectively, go fully into defense, and kick the neo-colonial bastard system out once and for all. We need to realize that now is not the time to continue to spend on family, weddings, wakes, baptisms, tribe, village things as usual, but to divert your maximum possible money to the higher cause of existential homeland defense. Because all you spend for your family is in vain when your homeland is gone. The Ambazonian state, nation, country, new constitution is higher. Because Ambazonia includes all fellow Ambazonians, and without them, your private life would be nothing. Remember when Russia and Germany were in war with each other in the Second World War. The state made it mandatory that every family gives a son to the front to fight, and those were millions. And Ambazonia has millions of residents, but the enemy has only thousands of soldiers. So the victory of Ambaland is only in the willingness of the Ambazonian people to stop following private interests first and to start following common interests. And logically, the more money and fighters the Ambazonian people give to the die-hard guerrilla commanders, like Dr. Akwanga or Dr. Choayaba, or General Yingfu Nsangong, or the Jiangsu boys, the faster victory comes. Because with them you can go sure that the defense will be built out. We can debate on social media or consultative conferences all year long, which is partly good. But the first duty of every Ambazonian citizen at home and abroad is to give all to the defense commanders right now in an existential situation. And if you don't have money yourself, at least swing the drumbeat inside your family, tribe and network to switch from talking to walking. It's easy for Ambazonia to defeat the desolate and illegal Biya system. If only all Ambazonians would understand the priority of homeland defense against foreign robbers. Christoph Messner from AmbazonianRevolution.org, reporting for Ambazonia Calling.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Welcome, Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. Let's begin with this conference they have called in Biya. How would you describe it?
Ntumfoyn, I would simply describe it as a dialogue with the devil.
Now, who is the devil?
That is the Satanic Republic of Cameroon. The Satanic Republic of Cameroon has consistently demonstrated that it is a devil. They started by deceiving the United Nations that they were going to establish a federation or a United Republic of Cameroon of equal status, English-speaking, French-speaking. What did they come up with? An asymmetrical federalism, which meant nothing. And in their so-called federal constitution of Article 47, talks of the inviolability of the territory of each of the constitutive states. What did they do? They deceived the United Nations, abrogated it in 1972. And then eventually, the Lion Man, that is Mr. Biya, came up in 1984 and turned it into everything, into whatever thing he called La Republic of Cameroon.
They have a track record of deceit, you mean?
They have been deceiving all through. Whether it be Biya himself promising that he is going to personally supervise the ring road, or he is going to construct the deep sea port in Victoria, they have destroyed everything and they keep on deceiving people. And that is why they say whenever Satan speaks a lie, speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies.
You are saying Biya steals. Do you have examples?
We do not need to go far to look for examples. Sonora pays taxes to Douala. That is theft, because according to them, Victoria not deserve it. Timber from Manu pays taxes to Ebolova, San Melima, and Balmayo. Could any theft be more blatant than this?
Have there not been rulings for dialogue?
The court in Banjo wrote and called for an inclusive dialogue in those days, and then it was not. Even during the creation of the African uselessness, or what people call African Union, Biya did not attend the meeting. That is when the African Union saw it as obligatory for that dialogue, inclusive dialogue, to be instituted and conducted. He was never there, since he's always an absentee in everything.
But this particular conference is going to have conveners wearing cassocks.
The Satanic Republic of Cameroon is a real spiritual, not a myth or figment of the imagination as we know. It is made up of gangsters. So that is what I can tell Ambazonians now, that they have to resist the devil. They have to fight. They have not to settle down for any nonsense in the name of dialogue. So whether he is coming in priestly robes or whatever, in whatever cassocks, you know that he remains the devil.
The Secretary General of the United Nations, do you think he's not acting in good faith?
He had already been poisoned with the golden statue which was given to him by Biya. That was only the open face of what he might have had in camera. So we know that he can never stand for the truth. He can never stand for peace. He's not a man of peace. He's not somebody who should be related in any way to any claims to knowing or how to go about peace. Because in his statement, he says that minorities usually provoke. How can somebody, Secretary General of the United Nations, declares war on people and then starts fighting the war using troops not only from France, from Chad, from Equatorial Guinea, from Congo, from Gabon, and so on, to fight against unarmed civilians, murdering people in bushes, murdering children in hospitals? I think that man needs to be re-educated on what the United Nations stands for, especially its charter. I don't think he knows the charter of the United Nations.
Do you mean the Secretary General is corrupt?
That is exactly what we call pay to play. That is corruption at global level. It is unthinkable that a man in such a position. In fact, all I will advise Ambazonians to do is do all that it takes to flush that fellow out of that office before he ruins the institution and the rest of the world and the name of the United Nations. Because he is clueless about what the United Nations stands for. He is not part of peace. How can he be? He is presiding over the liquidation of global peace. So we have to do all it takes to flush him out. Otherwise, he will ruin the world.
Are you launching a campaign by Ambazonians to call for the firing of the Secretary General of the United Nations?
A spirited campaign, a spirited one. We have to go to U.S. Secretary of State and then go to other places to make sure that that fellow with his fractured English expression should be flushed out of that office.
Do you not believe that the UN is doing its job to prevent genocide?
They send their eyes away in order to hide genocide. In spite of the fact that you have all those things, never again. Even the so-called African uselessness, or you call the African unity, they have said time and again, never again. Yet it is happening of their very eyes, and they are seeing everything, seeing the evidence daily and nightly, but still claiming that they are not seeing. Do they need special spectacles which have never been manufactured?
Thank you very much, Prof, and have a wonderful week.
We pray that God will tide us over. Thank you, Prof.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
At some point recently, some had called for inter-communal violence consisting of Ambazonians chasing out citizens of neighboring Republic of Cameroon from each other's homelands. Happily, those threats did not materialize, and violence has so far been avoided, thankfully, except for those fake attacks that the colonial regime is perpetrating and trying to hang around the neck of restoration forces, as Jude Ozugen reports.
The colonizer has been itching for a long time to wage a war of national unity, one in which French-speaking citizens of La République view and treat Ambazonians as enemies. Unable to justify such a war, the colonizer is resorting to desperate measures. A week ago, and unnoticed by many, the Biya's regime attacked its own citizens in Fongo Tongo in the western region. It then tried to pen those attacks as having been perpetrated by Amba fighters. Footage of refugees triggered by the attack was aired on pro-regime TV stations. They showed some of the refugees staging a protest march in neighboring Chang, into which they fled. Fongo Tongo was one of at least 3 locations where such fake attacks have been staged. The towns of Lum and Banga have been reportedly attacked. Yaoundé wants Francophones to believe that Ambazonians hate them for no good reason and seek to kill them in retributive killings. Part of the reasons the regime is so desperate to trigger such intercommunal violence is the real possibilities of blaming those Ambazonians who have, unwisely, called for attacks on Francophones. Happily and very wisely, Ambazonians have not taken that bait. Remarkably, Francophones have not bought the fictions the evil regime in Yaoundé has been selling them. With hardly enough resources to provide self-defense for their people, Ambazonians fighters cannot afford to fight a war on several fronts. It is already a daunting challenge to go up against a Franco-Cameroonian war machine reinforced by Israeli and American military expertise and supplies, funded by Chinese loans and supplied with sophisticated Serbian guns. That is why the colonial regime has been unsuccessful in attributing retributive attacks or military offensive east of the Mongo on Ambazonian self-defense groups. Besides, Ambazonians gain nothing hitting civilian targets inside La République, in just the same way as they gain nothing targeting Francophones living in Ambazonia. Peace-loving people on either side of the Mongo know that Ambazonians have nothing against Francophones and vice versa. Ambazonia does not seek occupied territories within La République. They seek solely to defend our people and to chase the killers out of Ambazonia. The colonizer, on the other hand, wants to portray Ambazonians fighters as targeting civilians. It was the aim of the manipulative videos out of Fongo Tongo. The overall goal is to convince its sponsor France to abuse its powers at the UN using fake reports like the one from Human Rights Watch last week to tag Ambazonians terrorists. La République will pop champagne and celebrate if Ambazonians launch attacks on civilians east of the Mongo or within Ambazonia. It must remain a no-go area for Ambazonian fighters. Thankfully, they have stayed off of such attacks. They need to stick with the strategy of reaffirming the right of Ambazonia not only to self-determination but also to self-defense. It is a point that was clearly articulated at the Congress of the United States, a right enshrined under the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. No rights are violated if Ambazonians stick to defending themselves against the genocidal violence the Biya regime has launched against them. Sticking with that strategy leaves room for Ambazonians' political movement to continue to use diplomatic, legal, and non-violent means to convince the world to recognize Ambazonia. At Ambazonia Calling, we will not tire of reminding the world that it is a colonizer who waged this war, leaving Ambazonians no choice than to defend themselves in the face of political and physical massacre and possible extermination. This is Jude Agua Ozugan reporting for Ambazonia Calling.
With thousands of Ambazonians abducted, deported and held in the dungeons, jails and rotten prisons of the colonialists, Manjong Jutambe says it took the rape of a 17-year-old breastfeeding mother for Yaoundé to remember that they have a military tribunal in Bamenda and Biya, where anyone arrested in Ambazonia could have gone on trial. Here is his report.
Colonial Cameroon is full of tricks, but sometimes even the best of musicians run out of tricks. The witch of Cameroon, Paul Biya, is out of tricks in the middle of performance on an open stage, and is now forced to face the watchful eyes of his audience in disgrace. Barbarians pass around for police, soldiers and gendarmes are caught daily, pants down, trigger happily engaged in wanton, ungodly and unconscionable acts of atrocity crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, ranging from the rape of young girls, women and children to murder. Only criminals want the law suspended whenever they are caught in a crime. In the not-too-distant past, Colonial Yaoundé deported thousands of Ambazonians to their jails and dungeons in Yaoundé, charging them before the Yaoundé Military Tribunal. Who would have known that the colonialists had a functional military tribunal in Bamenda and Biya? When one of his rapists was caught in the act in Bamenda, the colonialists suddenly remembered that they have a military tribunal in Bamenda. Yaoundé must know that nobody is fooled. Yaoundé has been frustrated by the common law courts in Bamenda ruling to release political prisoners they would have loved to lock away for the rest of their lives. In 1992, Justice Fombe of the Bamenda High Court traumatized the colonialists by ruling to release detainees of the state of emergency. Vexed, Yaoundé declared Bamenda a court of private jurisdiction, labeling Honorable Fombe a private judge, lacking the competence to rule on administrative matters. In Dinka versus La République, the Bamenda High Court found La République guilty of treason for unconstitutionally changing the name of the country. There's no secret that Yaoundé's inability to dictate to common law judges remains a thorn in his flesh. Mr. Biya's preference for his decree-mandated kangaroo military courts surprises none, except that he shamelessly resurrected the Bamenda military whatever in order to arraign rapist Mbida Arthur. Even La République, which rapes Cameroonians daily, pretended to be embarrassed by Mbida, raping a 17-year-old nursing mother in broad daylight. But let us be very clear on this issue. Mbida is not alone. His only crime, according to La République, is that he got caught, like his brothers, who filmed themselves in action, gleefully executing women and children in the north. La République's use of rape as an instrument of war, first denounced by Honorable Joseph Weber, lamenting on the rape of his niece at the University of Biya, can no longer be hidden. Notwithstanding, isn't it intriguing that Mbida, a foreigner, can be charged and arraigned in Ambazonia, whereas Ambazonians like Mancho Bibixi, Ndango Patrick, Nkonwa Agbobala, Dr. Niba Fontem, Senator Penn, and a host of others had to face the injustice of French courts? Yaoundé long realized it needed the loyalty, blind adherence to the regime by chicken-hearted, decree-appointed, Biya-fearing judges to obtain rulings pleasing to the God of Etudi. At Ambazonia Calling, we thank the young victim of rapism Biya. Her bravery in defying the shame and stigma that comes with her ordeal, crying and telling her story within minutes of its occurrence, will forever remain a blessing to many an Ambazonian woman. She's only one of thousands of Ambazonian girls and women raped, but the advertisement her ordeal has received has shone light on a dark side to this struggle. She deserves justice, as do all other victims. Her screams and tears happen to be the proverbial wind that our parents predict must blow for the world to see the anus of a chicken. Manjon Jutambe, reporting for Ambazonia Calling.
We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Ntumfoyn of the week. A pattern is emerging with those leading the pack of contenders each week for the crown of Ntumfoyn of the week. They never seem to get enough of doing foolish. Here now with the rundown of contenders for Ntumfoyn of the week is Veronique Vetimfe, delivered in studio by Prince Ajwa Alem of Cape Town, USA.
If it smells like a fool, thinks like a fool, and acts like a fool, it must be a fool. Our lineup of the most incorrigible fools of this week includes, in third position, the office of the spokesperson of the United Nations. This office has become notoriously anti-Ambazonia in everything they do. Every time massacres have been reported in Ambazonia, staff of the bribe-taking United Nations are led by this office in claiming that they cannot authenticate the video nor the photos of the massacre. That is how come they have not, to this day, authenticated the video and photos of the Menka and Tiden massacres. Talk less of the massacre last Monday at Bakuri Town in Biya. This office has been quick in authenticating investigative journalist Matthew Lee. The soul-searching questions of Matthew Lee have embarrassed the UN, which cannot buy his silence. Instead, it has resorted to withdrawing his accreditation and shutting him out of press briefings. His crime is asking too many authentic questions about the corrupt nature of the United Nations and the office of the spokesperson of the United Nations, which is the third place finisher for the Ntumfoyn of the week. In the position of runner-up this week is Chief Justice Aya Paul Abini and the Secretary General of the Northwest Funds Association, Fund Yakum Tevir. This week, the Honorable Judge started the bizarre process of undoing much of the honor he has earned, notably as a recently released political prisoner, while the Funds Association took action to betray the people of Ambazonia. Chief Justice Aya, along with Kawala, signed onto the AAC3 initiative launched by Christian Cardinal Tumi and Dr. Simon Munzu. For a man of law and for a Chief Justice, Aya made the case that the AAC3 cannot yield a harvest, yet handed down a very illogical ruling. It is a ruling Chief Aya should have never been involved with, given the fact that he is on the same side as Cardinal Tumi and Dr. Munzu in support of a 10-state federation. If the Chief Justice lived by the legal principles that bar a judge from sitting in judgment over a matter in which the judge has an interest, Justice Aya would have recused himself, and the Fund, Yakum Tevir, would have remembered that the Fund is nobody without his people. This week, the Funds Association of the Northern Zone, a not-so-hidden cell of the ruling party, and Justice Aya made the bold pro-CPDM recommendation for Ambazonians to commit suicide by supporting a good-for-nothing AAC3. For looking only after their interest, not the interest of the people, the Funds Association of the Northern Zone and Chief Justice Aya Paul Abini are this week's runner-ups for the crown of Ntumfoyn of the week. The winner this week is a familiar person. It is someone who seems to be lobbying very hard every week to just keep the crown of foolishness as his private property. He has been nominated too many times before now. He has even lifted the trophy of shame. He is the fellow who scammed his way into the University of Biya without even passing the GCE. He is the mayor who this week reportedly engineered the massacre of young men in Bakure town, Biya, adding to those he is accused of killing or torturing on September 22nd and October 1st of last year. Patrick Ekema, the man who this week led the first tribal protests in Ambazonia, and who may have provided justification to the Ewondo people to own Yaoundé the same way Bakure people should supposedly own Biya. Patrick Ekema is the man on the hook for the most foolishness in 1 week, and he is this week's winner of the dishonorable crown of shame, the Nyafuka of the week.
The question is often raised whether Ambazonians should sacrifice everything they hope freedom can bring until they can successfully win the revolution. Many believe that certain freedoms should be suspended and that tolerance and democratic practices should wait until we arrive Biya. Willibrod Ade explains why postponing freedoms and liberties is taking on a very bad habit.
It is alarming to see Ambazonians embrace some of the same vices that push them to want out of the ill-fated Njumba marriage. Change, they say, is hard, but change we must if Ambazonia is going to survive as a nation. We should bear in mind that change involves giving up something we are used to for something new or different. It means getting out of our comfort zone into unfamiliar territory. In our case, it entails doing a 180-degree paradigm shift from an autocratic system to one we hope will be built on democratic principles. In order for us to safely navigate such a dramatic change, we have to unlearn the bad habits that we had imbibed for over half a century and start practicing the values that we would like to see in our new country. The freedoms and justice we crave will not magically become the way of life in Ambazonia simply because we have secured our territory and are managing our own affairs. The notion that things will automatically fall in place and our people will just start practicing the democratic principles we cherish once we get to Biya is a fool's paradise, if ever there was one. Most of us are familiar with the saying, old habits die hard. So it is important that while we are still engaged in what we can describe as the Ambazonian Intifada, we try as much as possible to inculcate in our daily activities the various principles that will differentiate our country from Cameroon. Otherwise, we may find ourselves struggling to survive the peace that will follow this war, simply because we failed to practice what we preached. As a wise man once said, all the flowers of tomorrow are in the seeds of today. If we don't start laying the building blocks for the kind of country we are dreaming of now, by implementing the ideals we profess today, it is not in Biya that we will start doing that. If we cannot tolerate divergence of views now, we will have a very hard time accepting it when we are finally in control of our affairs. If we can't stand freedom of speech now, we will not suddenly become proponents of free speech in an independent Ambazonia. The fact is that, like children whose artlessness predisposes them to miss the truth and be drawn to myths and fantasies like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, Ambazonians will be deluded to think that things will magically change once we get to Biya. Advocates of this blatant deceit keep harping on about the fact that Ambazonia is different. We are in a revolution. Our case is unique, and so on and so forth. All this is true, But while the sui generis nature of our struggle cannot be disputed, the fact remains that we are still human, with our foibles and all. For human beings are not like light bulbs that can just be turned on and off with the flip of a switch to have them change their behavior patterns or thought processes. If we start tolerating or enabling anti-democratic and autocratic practices now, while we are still struggling to secure our homeland, we would be setting ourselves up for failure. Ambazonians did not resist Cameroon colonization, single-party state rule, endure indescribable indignities, risk life and limb, only to end up in a miniature Cameroon. In that case, we would have become what the late South African musician Hugh Masekela describes as bad imitations of those who oppressed us. God forbid. Ambazonians will be wise to heed the advice of the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. This is Willibrod Ade for Ambazonia Calling.
At this moment, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Ambazonians have been directly or indirectly impacted or affected by the ongoing restoration struggle in Ambazonia. Thousands are in jails. Tens of thousands are in exile in neighboring Nigeria alone. Tens of thousands have been massacred or summarily executed, disappeared, raped, maimed, or tortured. Here is the monk from Balikumato, Vedzekov himself, with a tribute to all Ambazonian heroes, beginning with those killed this week, such as a dear brother, Esambe Roland Ndone, whose fast decomposing body was discovered in Musaka banana plantation along the Munyakumba road, where he had been executed by colonial forces. Here's the monk.
A tribute to Ambazonian heroes, fallen and still alive. The history of humans is an ongoing story with few surprises after many centuries. It is indeed in the nature of humans to reject and rise up against blatant injustice. That is what the 1688 glorious revolution in England, the 1776 Declaration of Independence of America, the 1789 French Revolution were all about. The word liberalism is born of the core ideas of all these and more revolutions around the world. The 2017 Declaration of the Independence of the State of Ambazonia goes down in history as a revolution in this African sub-region. Like all revolutions in human history, Ambazonia has its own heroes and is making new ones as time rolls on. While our citizens congregate in groups and do all in their power to move our people towards a more free and just state, more heroes are created and many more in the dojos of revolutionary do-it-yourself training. Tough times call for tough people. Amba heroes are known by their works. And here is a general list of heroes of the revolution by category. Number 1, all citizens of Ambaland in Ground Zero who are impacted directly or indirectly by the brutality of Franco-Cameroonese armed agents. They are our heroes. All Amba defense forces across the territory of Ambazonia who have put their lives in harm's way to defend Ambaland and its citizens. They are our heroes. All Ambazonians locked up in the unhygienic jails of Franco-Cameroon for standing up for what they believe in, the truth about a free Ambazonia. They are our heroes. all Ambazonia citizens who have paid an exceptional personal public sacrifice to the revolution. In this category would be the names of living heroes and ancestor heroes, those who have gone from this plane. They are our heroes. As in most revolutions, there is bloodshed, tears, and unnecessary loss of life. It is the loss of life that is the most expensive loss for our communities. Things can be replaced. A life lost cannot. Even with all the technology that man has created, the technique of resurrection has not been developed. Not yet. So what is the point? Every Amba citizen is special, unique, and irreplaceable. Every Amba citizen lost in this restoration revolution is a hero. As living Amba citizens, it would help in ways we may not know to give a moment's dedication to these fallen citizens who have joined the ancestors of Amba land beyond the veil that we, the living, cannot see. We will call their names aloud and in silence. They gave blood, sweat, tears, and their living spirit for Ambaland. They will live in Ambaland. They live in Ambaland. This is the tribal monk in Ibalikumato, Vadrukov himself, for Ambazonia Calling.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, the news out there is that your grandson, Manu Macron, has invited you to some peace summit he is organizing in Paris in mid-November 2018. I know. You are scandalized, right? I am too. I mean, no one is supposed to know, except those of us in the family. Those of us who know that you have already won that presidential election. I mean, what am I saying? That presidential selection of next October 7. I mean, please forgive my petit frère Manu. He does not appreciate the knowledge that comes with some grand katika like you having a PhD in election rigging. One thing is to know how to rig. It is a completely different thing to know how not to be caught doing it. One thing is to cheat at elections. It is quite another to remember every lie and to repeat it exactly right. That is why you need a man who has done some time in the big house, like Atanga and Paul, to handle all the tiffing. Your grandson Manu does not know what it means to organize elections, to get votes in, and then to go to work correcting the outcome of the election to ensure that the right candidate wins. That is what is wrong with children of today. I mean, twats like Manu, not seeking any advice from grandpa elders like you. Now that your grandson has let the rigging cat out of the election bag, you know what to do next. You did it already with the Secretary General of the United Nations. It is not hard. You need to find a few more of those bewitched golden statues, the ones you use as bribe gifts. You will also need to make some indirect wire transfers through offshore accounts, and boom, even the Secretary General of the United Nations will commit in an official report to your office that he will abuse his own good offices to run PR operations for even the demon that you are. I mean, the Secretary General will not just look away from what your war crimes and crimes against humanity are. No, he is willing to cover for you, to take a bullet for you, Joshua. with the help of Mother France, and I don't mean the mother who is married to grandson Manu. I mean Mother France of nos ancêtres les Gallois, the one whose national anthem calls on his citizens to take up arms against tyrants like you, Joshua. Aux armes citoyens, formez vos bataillons, marchons, marchons. And there is more advice in that anthem for teen gods in power like you and their collaborators. It says, tremble, tyrants, and you traitors. With the help of Mother France, the UN spokesperson, the French citizen, now can expel any journalist, notably that inquisitive Matthew Lee, whenever they ask embarrassing questions about the Cameroons and the war in Ambazonia during press briefings. With their lips all well-oiled, as they say back in Gola, the General Secretary of the United Nations, of Guterres, of Golden Statue Genocide, he has now joined Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch in issuing only pro-regime reports aimed at attracting the most sympathy for those your poor soldiers killed by gunpowder from stray chavums in Ambazonia. Don't get me wrong, Joshua. Your friends tell me that you are a good man. I agree with them. But I want them to know that you are not only a good man, you are an even better monster. You are Africa's only surviving baby-killing monster. You prefer the baby snatched from life while still on a sling on their mothers' backs. Your jailbird friends like Paula Tanganji and the coup plotter Isa Chiruma just need to understand that you are that kind of demon. You are the evil one, begotten, not made, who has managed to turn the once prosperous land bequeathed to you by your illustrious predecessor into a hellhole on earth. To your credit, you understand what an animal you are, which is why you have not been ashamed to proudly take on the nickname of Lion Man. Speaking of which, do you know you are in fact giving the poor lion a bad name? I know lions that would not execute babies on a sling on their mothers' backs. I know of lions which will not burn up Mami Api in her home in Kwakwa, who will not kill people with disability and who will not try to set them up with a gun, and who will definitely not burn patients alive in the district hospital in Bongé. You are a different kind of bloodthirsty animal, Joshua. You are such a man-eater that some of my friends have now suggested that we should name you after one of your ancestors, Hitler. Remember him? I was like, nah. I mean, why waste a good name like that when your DNA seems to suggest that you are closer to Lucifer than to Adolf Hitler? I've got to go, Joshua. See you in hell. From our studios here in Washington, D.C., our producer is Jeff McCoy. Our music today is from Ken Wanaku, the monk from Balikumato, William Ford, an ambassador of blessed memory, Eric Matisse on the web at soundimage.org, and Prince Ajua Alemanji of Ajam Sonic Kitron, USA. Ambazonia Calling is a joint production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. You can find us on the web at www.themissionstribune.com, www.compassfreepress.com, and www.africafreedomnetwork.com. Next Sunday is another day. Until then, keep the spirit, keep the faith, keep up the fight for justice and independence for Ambazonia. Stay Amba strong.